I don't feel special. River ruffled her hair. Your mother and I knew you were special the day you were born. Parents always say that to their kids. That's because it's always true, River said. Good night, Puka. Father? River turned back. If the Anu genes are in our family bloodline, don't you or mother also have special abilities? River smiled. Grandmother Mimsy had a few, but sometimes, it skips a generation. River descended the moving stairway and left Willa to her thoughts. She tapped the wall twice to open her window and stared out at the silver crescent moon through the canopy of oak leaves. An acorn flew through the window and bounced across the floor, rudely interrupting her reverie. She peered down at Thorn far below. He gestured for her to join him. Willa widened her window, stepped through, and hopped from branch to branch until she reached the base of the tree. Thorn and Willa hugged and, holding hands, hurried off through the grove. They stopped among the trees a few hundred yards away with the nest still in view, shimmering in the moonlight. I couldn't sleep, Thorn said. I have to know, did you tell me everything you saw about my father? I think I told you more than I should have. Thorn sat on a large, flat boulder. Willa joined him. Part of me wishes you hadn't said anything until we were sure we could rescue him, Thorn said, his eyes welling. In some ways, it was easier just believing he was dead. Willa bit her lip, afraid to say anything for fear of making him feel worse. She fought back her own tears and held his hand. We'll bring your father home. A silky voice slipped between them like a blade. Ah, the eternal optimism of youth. Willa and Thorn jumped to their feet as Celine stepped from the shadow of an oak into the pale moonlight. Diane Nymphaea, Willa blurted. We didn't hear you coming. Nocturnals are synonymous with stealth, dear girl, or didn't the Shards show you that? Thorn wanted to come to Willa's defense, but his mouth was dry as dust. Willa took up the charge. What are you doing here? I didn't expect to see you until morning. Celine pierced Willa with her coal-black eyes. I find you curious. Willa felt the same skin-crawling sensation as she had when Encantado turned his own obsidian orbs on her. She offered Celine a respectful bow of her head. I'm honored to warrant the attention of a nocturnal. At least you have proper manners, Celine huffed, which is more than I can say for your tongue-tied friend here. I apologize, Thorn said, I've never met a member of the quorum before. And why should you have? Celine smirked. We rarely have business with mundanes. No offense. None taken, Thorn lied. He wondered if Celine could sense his growing dislike of her. I was going to start the training. Don't bother, Celine interrupted. I can sense you're not cut out for it. Celine ignored Thorn's rising anger and returned her gaze to Willa. To answer your question, I'm here to ask a favor. A favor you didn't want to ask in front of the quorum, said Willa. Celine's icy composure cracked ever so slightly, then froze over again. Let's let this be our little secret, shall we, dear girl? I'm honored to be taken into your confidence, Willa said with another bow of her head. Though she would never admit it out loud, Celine was impressed by Willa's verbal sparring. This was no mere child. Perhaps Holly was right. There was something special about this apprentice. When you take the Divinorum tomorrow, if you see the Shards again, I would ask that you look for something in particular. Thorn stepped closer to Celine. Willa needs to look for my father, he said, his voice a notch higher than he would have liked. Celine regarded him like she would an annoying insect. So, your father gives you the courage you lack on your own. It's okay, Willa said. I can do both. Celine's eyes narrowed. Such confidence. Or is it merely bravado? I mean, I'll do my best, Willa said, humbled. I suppose that's all I can ask, Celine said. If you can manage it, Look for a shard that reflects a ghostly presence with long white hair, a mournful wail and a face etched by unimaginable misery. Willa couldn't hide her surprise. You're talking about the Banshee of Marrowbone Bridge. You know the story. Excellent. Thorn rested a wary hand on Willa's shoulder. Willa, banshees aren't to be trifled with. Celine's eyes flickered to Thorn, dark as a threatening storm. Stay out of this, boy. If I may ask, Diane, Willa said, pulling Celine's attention back to her, exactly what is it you wish me to see? The formula for the potion that makes one into a wraith, Celine said softly, aware that the trees might overhear. Willa was horrified. But it turned Belladonna into a banshee. Only because that foul Puka tricked her. Without the nightshade, the potion might have worked, but she never wrote the formula down. Will you do this for me? Forgive me, Diane, but I don't understand. If you continue along the path, won't you eventually acquire the knowledge yourself? Celine fought the urge to slap the impertinent girl. That will take years. If your vision is true, we can't afford to wait. Belladonna's potion will hasten the process. Willa caught the desperation in Celine's tone. How many times have you tried to recreate the formula? Celine seethed in silence at Willa's brazen assessment. She clenched her teeth and forced herself to remain calm. Enough to know it's pointless without more information. Perhaps your connection to the Anu will give you an edge. So, I'm your last resort. Willa looked deep into Celine's ebony eyes. Her whole body shivered as a long-guarded secret unfolded within Willa's newly acquired insight. The glowing branches of Belladonna's family tree traced a path in her mind that led directly to Celine and, before she could stop herself, she blurted it out. You're Belladonna Bloodroot's great-granddaughter. The air around Celine grew as cold as her stare. Well, aren't you the clever girl? I'll thank you to keep that to yourself. Why? Thorn pressed, reveling in Willa's leverage over Celine. With some effort, Celine ignored Thorn and continued to address Willa as though she had asked the question. When Belladonna became a banshee, my grandmother erased all traces of our family's connection to her so it wouldn't impact Mother's chances of becoming a cryptic. However, Mother felt I should know the truth as a way of preparing me for the risks of following in her footsteps. Yet you're asking me to find the formula instead of asking Belladonna, Willa said. She won't tell me for fear I'll become a banshee like her. Then your great-grandmother's wiser than you are, Thorn said. Celine locked on Thorn like a shark that smells blood. Keep that up and you'll find yourself on the wrong end of a blade. She snapped. Diane. Willa said, shocked at Celine's venom. Thorn went white as a sheet. Are you threatening me? It's not a threat, Celine said. It's a warning. She turned her iron gaze back to Willa. Find that formula. And if I do? Willa said, worried she might be selling her soul to the devil. Then I won't block your entrance into the training. Holly's my mentor. That's not your decision. Isn't it? Celine said through an oily smile. Acceptance into the mastery requires the quorum's unanimous approval. One dissenting vote, Celine let the rest hang in the air. She turned and oozed her way back through the forest. Thorn took Willa's hand. Holly wouldn't let her do that, right? Willa kept her eyes on the trees, nervous that Celine might reappear at any moment. A glint of moonlight betrayed a pair of eyes staring at her from the shadows. The red fox that had watched her at 3 Rock Mountain sat among the roots of a large yew tree. It slipped away into the forest but left Willa with the feeling that the fox was more than it appeared to be. Thorn stepped in front of her to break her trance. Willa? Her eyes found his. Her gentle smile of assurance masked the doubts spinning in her mind. I need to get home before Mother and Father know I'm gone. Thorn nodded, and though they walked through the moonlit forest hand in hand, each was lost in their own troubled thoughts. Kale stood under the steaming spray of a shower, eyes closed, hoping the hot water would wash away the memory of his grueling ordeal at the hands of the Archon's interrogators. As the water stung his wounds, he was assaulted by the memories of his cruel interrogators as they beat the secrets from him. He shook off the grisly visions of their leering faces, stepped out and dried himself. He looked in the mirror and took stock of the scars they'd inflicted on him. Kale knew he could never wash those away. He entered the main room of the small apartment deep within the League's moonbase. He dressed in the plain black tunic, pants and boots his rescuers had provided. A shy knock drew him to the door. Brim stood in the hall. "Mother wanted me to let you know the council will meet at midday." Kale gestured for Brim to enter. "Thank you. You must be Alara's son." "I'm Brim. Kale Ashgrove." Brim stifled a laugh and blushed in mild embarrassment. "I'm sorry. I see why my mother didn't mention your name to me." Kale stared at Brim, waiting for an explanation. Brim collected himself. "It's just that, on my world, a kale is a long pole used in combat. But it's also slang for, you know, a man's, I get the idea," Kale said, remembering Alara's smile when he introduced himself. "I'd be happy to escort you to the council chamber. Mother also wanted to know if you're comfortable with the quarters," Brim said, eager to please. "Yes, you've all been more than kind," Kale assured him. "I owe your family my life." "Do you have a family?" Brim said. Kale nodded. "2 boys about your age. Their names are Rowan, he's the oldest, and Thorn. I just had my 16th naming day," Brim said with more than a hint of pride. "Naming day?" "The day parents name their children, 1 orbit after they're born." "You don't have naming day?" "We name our children the day they're born. Sometimes before that." He shifted his weight in the chair, trying to find a more comfortable position. Despite Alara's herbal broth, it would be a while before his bruises fully healed. "Your mother said you've never left this moon." Brim nodded. "As you saw, Zoes isn't the best place to grow up. I can't imagine what it must be like for you in the Resistance, never knowing if your mother or father will." Kale bit his tongue, hoping he hadn't gone too far. Brim was very aware that death was the League's constant companion and took no offense. "Your sons must be very worried about you," he said in empathy. Kale's throat tightened. "They probably think I'm dead. Mother and father will do everything in their power to get you home. Maybe Rowan, Thorn and I could become friends. I'd like that. You remind me of them." Brim smiled at the compliment. A soft gong sounded 3 times in the hall. "The council's ready for you." Kale stood. "Lead the way." Willa sat in the Celtic circle in the lodge, ringed by every member of the quorum. As usual, Argus stood off to one side and kept a watchful eye on the proceedings. Holly handed Willa the cup of divinorum. Willa glanced at the faces that surrounded her, Holly's reassuring smile, Alder's encouraging nod, Celine's clandestine gaze, Encantado's determined scowl and, as before, the Larkspur twins' million-mile stare. Willa inhaled and drank the potent draught. Reality shifted in a heartbeat and Willa was once again standing on the infinite plane within her mind. The crystal sphere rumbled toward her from the horizon, but this time, she stood her ground. The moon-sized orb rolled over Willa and engulfed her in its liquid embrace. Willa floated to the heart of the sphere, whereupon it froze and fractured with the ear-splitting sound of a million mirrors breaking. Willa's ghostly doppelganger floated through the shifting shards, her eyes darting to each reflected image, searching for any sign of Kale or the secret to Belladonna's potion. Images of her mother and father, Thorn, Poppy, Holly, Alder and Celine flickered in and out, mixed with visions of ominous Orion attack ships filling the sky over Port Dublin. Her life unfolded again in a staccato sequence of memories and even alternate realities, showing several versions of Willa making different choices with different outcomes than those in her present life. Willa watched scenes of her parallel selves as they became cryptics, nocturnals, shapeshifters, sages and even wraiths, as well as things she never considered: a teacher, a spaceship captain and a mother with children of her own. She slowly discovered that if she concentrated on various timelines, she could summon groups of shards that presented more detailed images. They collected around her, immersing her in holographic tableaus as though she'd been transported to various points in space and time. She witnessed Belladonna as a young woman in the throes of passion with a mysterious lover, a union that branched the family tree and ultimately sprouted Celine. Willa felt every tender touch and kiss on her own body as though enthralled in the tryst herself, and blushed with embarrassment as she spied on the intimate exchange. She shifted her focus and watched as an older Belladonna experimented with all manner of herbs and tinctures in her search for the Wraith potion. She tried to commit each ingredient to memory until Belladonna accidentally knocked a bottle off her table. It smashed on the stone cottage floor and broke the vision. The shards tumbled and reformed into an image of Kale sitting at a large conference table with several dark-skinned strangers inside a large circular chamber carved from black rock. Willa's attention locked on a glowing star chart on the tabletop that traced a route from the League's dark moon through the swirling maelstrom to Earth's solar system. The shards scattered again, but before she could bring Kale's image back into focus, the reflections coalesced into a vision of Thorn, lying somewhere on a forest floor, dying from a bloody knife wound in his abdomen, just as Celine had warned. Willa recoiled from the horrifying vision and spun around to find herself facing another group of shards that depicted her, several months older, lying in the dirt, with Zoe's Asura standing over her bloody, broken body as the Quorum Lodge and Port Dublin burned to ashes. No! Willa screamed as she snapped from the disturbing dream, all eyes in the room still upon her. Tears flooded her cheeks. Mortified, she quickly wiped them away. "Are you okay, Willa?" Holly said gently. Willa nodded and composed herself. "What did you see?" Alder prompted. "I think Kale's been rescued," Willa announced to the relief of the quorum. "By whom?" Celine pressed. "I don't know. There was some kind of gathering. They were trying to find a way back, to bring him home, but," Willa's brow furrowed in confusion as she tried to divine the meaning of her vision. "But what?" Holly gently urged. "I think that if he returns, the invasion feels more certain." "When?" Encantado said. "I'm not sure." "Dig deeper," the shapeshifter demanded. "There's always more information under the surface." "I don't know how," Willa protested. "Focus on one memory," Encantado said. "It'll guide you further." Willa's closed her eyes. Her memory flickered back to the vision of Port Dublin on fire. She tried to ignore the image of the Archon standing over her dying body and found that her mind could move around in the memory, shifting her point of view as though it was a holographic projection. She moved through the burning embers of the village until she came to the Quorum Lodge, half engulfed by flames. Her vision passed through the crumbling walls into the Divinorum chamber. The twisted and broken dead bodies of the Quorum members were splayed out on the floor around the central circle. An Orion girl a little older than Willa, with grey skin and pale eyes, clad in black battle armor, stood dead center in the circle and stared down at the ring of corpses like a ravenous predator guarding fresh kills. The girl's eyes jerked up and locked onto Willa as though she could see her. "Who are you?" An intense wave of dark malice emanated from the Orion with such intensity. Willa felt that if the encounter had been physical instead of merely in her vision, the girl's glare would have seared the flesh from her bones. Willa snapped from her trance, her face a mask of terror. She collapsed into Holly's arms and burst into sobs. Holly held her tight and rocked back and forth as though comforting an infant. It's okay, little fox, you're safe here." We need to know what she saw, Celine pressed. Leave her be, Holly said. Give her time. We may not have much time. Moshi barked. Did you see their ships, their weapons? Holly glared ice daggers at the shapeshifter. I said leave her be. Rose and Lilac both rested their waifish hands on Willa's shoulder. She felt their sweet, soothing presence and was calmed by their touch. Willa sat up, wiped at her tears. Thank you. I'm okay. I just need some time. That's fine, Holly said with finality. We'll reconvene when you're good and ready. Besides, we'll want to deliver the good news to Thorn and Rowan that their father's alive and in good hands. The quorum members rose, said their goodbyes and left. Except for Alder. Holly and Argus regarded the sage as he peered at Willa in silence. Considering Willa's unique abilities, I believe she should advance to the next stage of the passage, Alder said. Argus gazed at Willa with his deep-set eyes and grunted in agreement. Maybe Willa is seed. What are you saying, Argus? Alder asked, puzzled. It's an ancient story among his people, Holly explained, not pleased that Argus brought it to Alder's attention. When world in need, there be a seed. By sacred deed, world is freed. Alder looked at the Sasquatch. So, you're saying Willa is this seed? Argus shrugged his huge shoulders. Said maybe. Willa may be unique, but she still has a lot to learn. Perhaps you can join in her training in a month or two, Holly suggested. What do you think, Willa? Said Alder. With all due respect, Master Redwood, my mentor knows me best. Yes, of course, Alder said, backing down. I meant no disrespect. Holly bowed her head. Think nothing of it, she said, knowing he would think of nothing else. Alder pressed on. But perchance, with our combined guidance and training, we shall find Willa ready sooner than most. We shall see, Holly said. Come, Willa, you need rest. Time to head home. Willa bowed to Alder and Argus and followed Holly from the lodge. As they crossed Marrowbone Bridge on their way to the Shattuck, Willa gave a furtive glance toward the yew forest that sequestered Belladonna's cottage deep within its heart. What did Celine ask you to do? Holly said. Willa was stricken. What do you mean? Nothing. Willa Hillycrissing, you're as transparent to me as glass. I know you saw more in your vision than you're willing to say. And I sense urgency from Celine when she looks at you. That's got nothing to do with the invasion. Her ambition blazes like a beacon. What does she want? I promised I wouldn't tell, Willa said. Holly sighed. Then I suppose you'd best keep your promise. But if she puts you in harm's way, she'll have me to answer to. You ken my meaning? Willa nodded, surprised by Holly's ire, but grateful to have such a caring protector. As they continued along the path, Willa looked back at the forest and, for a fleeting moment, she could have sworn Belladonna's glowing eyes peered out at them from the shadows between the trees. Chapter 9. Rusalka. Red Rabbit. Red Rabbit. Where you inhabit. Up is down. And left is right. Dark by day. You shine at night. Rabbit red. Rabbit red. By your song, we are led. Forward and back. Outside and in. Until we lose track of where we've been. Children's rhyme, circa 2250. Author unknown. Willa woke up in a cold sweat. The images of Zo's Asura and the mysterious grey girl had invaded her dreams and twisted them into nightmares. She tapped her window open, hoping to feel a soothing breeze. As she gazed out at the moonlit forest, she could just barely make out Celine's silhouette between two ash trees. Celine turned and disappeared into the shadows. She left her hammock, touched a spot on her bathroom countertop. A bowl formed in the nano-glass counter and filled with water. Willa splashed her face until she was fully awake. An air duct appeared in the wall above the sink and gently blew her face dry. Willa tiptoed to the spiral stairs, peered over the railing to see if her parents were still up. Darkness and silence told her they were fast asleep. Willa snuck back to the wall near her hammock, climbed down the tree and melted into the woods. She reached the flat boulder where she and Thorn had talked and didn't have to wait long before Celine emerged from the shadow of a large oak. "Did you see it?" Celine said without ceremony. "Part of it," Willa said as she handed Celine a small nano-glass marble. "I'll have to see if I can get the rest later." Celine stared at the marble like it was the key to life itself, closed her slender fingers around it and tucked it in a pocket. "Thank you," she grudgingly whispered as she slipped back into the shadows and vanished. Willa remained on the rock and allowed the crisp night air to cool her fevered thoughts. She was about to head home when a strange, trilling voice that fluttered like a hummingbird's wings issued from somewhere between the trees. "You must not give her the formula." Willa looked around, wary and ready to run. "Who are you? Where are you?" "Here, girl." Willa pivoted to face two glowing red eyes in the shadows about 4 feet off the ground. Rusalka the puka, in his favorite shape as a giant hare, stepped into the wan moonlight, rabbit ears held high above his feral face. His fur was mottled black and gray with a white streak down the center of his twitching nose. "Who are you?" Willa asked, still slightly on edge. "My name's Rusalka," claimed the puka. "Rusalka?" Willa blurted in astonishment. "You know me, girl?" He cocked his furry head as though trying to remember where they might have met before. "You're the one from the story. That lie's been following me for 300 years. Just because you know the story doesn't mean you know me," the puka said, his temper growing foul. "I know what you did to Belladonna," Willa shot back. "And what I'll do to your nocturnal friend if you tell her the rest of the ingredients." "She's not my friend, but I won't let you do that to her." The puka laughed at Willa's misguided gallantry. "More like you're not her friend if you help her become a wraith." "What do you mean?" "Few can handle it. Fewer still survive the transformation." "I did Belladonna a favor," Rusalka said, puffing out his chest. Willa was incensed. Turning her into a banshee, trapping her forever between life and death. "You call that a favor? The way I heard it, you were afraid she'd become more powerful than you." The puka leapt forward in anger. "Another lie." Willa backed into a tree, nervous. The puka realized she was frightened, but he also sensed something else about her. Something different, though he couldn't quite put a paw on it. He collected his wits and sat on the edge of the boulder. "Sorry. Didn't mean to scare you. Come and sit." Willa didn't budge. "Really, it's okay, my bark is worse than my bite," Rusalka said, attempting to lighten the mood. "You have pretty big teeth." Willa stayed still as a statue, afraid the puka might cast a spell on her any second. Her heart pounded as Rusalka's red eyes remained fixed on her. "I suppose it's my own fault that the story paints me in such an unflattering light," Rusalka said, his ears drooping. Willa knew that pukas were mercurial at the best of times and stayed near the tree, although part of her wondered if there was another side to Belladonna's story. "There are other wraiths," Willa said. "Why didn't you try to stop them?" "I may be an elemental, but I can't be everywhere at once," the puka said, sulking. "Besides, some find other ways to transform into wraiths. No way to trick them. We stop some, but not all. Why do you care if a sage lives or dies? What's it to you?" Rusalka's ears drooped in resignation. "Okay, I might not have been completely honest. Not that becoming a wraith isn't dangerous, but there's a more important reason to prevent it." Willa crossed her arms, trying to appear nonchalant. "Do tell." Rusalka sized her up. You're a peculiar pearl, aren't you? Willa held her ground and waited him out. The puka plucked a weed from a crack in the boulder and stuck it between his teeth. He chewed on it thoughtfully. Before your hybrid ancestors landed on Earth, the more rarefied realms of nature, those just beyond most human senses, were the domains of the elementals. Humans were either too focused or too dull-witted to perceive us except on rare occasions when conditions were just right. Willa nodded her understanding. Then the hybrids came along. Your heightened senses and advanced technology proved to humanity that my people weren't just the ravings of drunken fools or the stuff of fairy tales. That was fine with us. We were happy to be acknowledged and included in the affairs of the physical world. But then, your kind started to evolve even further. You became cryptics, nocturnals, shapeshifters, sages, claiming powers and abilities once possessed only by elementals. You became our equals, but some of your sages weren't satisfied with that. They desired to master the realms of spirit, to possess abilities while alive that nature bestows only upon those who have gone beyond this plane of existence. The elementals knew this could twist a soul into something neither dead or alive, but something dark, something that would tear a hole between the two realms and allow chaos to spill into each. Rusalka became silent for a long time. Willa risked taking a few steps around to the side. Are you okay? The puka shook off his fugue. We did try to talk sense into some of those who tried, but they were determined. So we came up with a plan. To feed them false information when you could. The puka nodded, not at all proud of the decision. We felt we had no choice. By turning those sages into banshees, they acted as a kind of block, sealing the rift between the spirit and material worlds with their ectoplasmic bodies. But then they're powerless in either realm. They're just stuck in between. Yes, Rusalka admitted, like a cork. Unplug them and all hell might break loose. So you see, it's not just about protecting elementals. The whole Earth is at stake. Willa scrunched her brow in confusion. There are a few wraiths in the world, yet there's been no breach, none of the chaos you feared would happen. Don't be so sure. I didn't say it would suddenly be doomsday. The changes are subtle at first. A little nudge down a different path, a left turn instead of a right, and over time, our world could find itself on a collision course with disaster. Color drained from Willa's face as she remembered the terrifying vision of Port Dublin in flames. Rusalka's red eyes shifted to her. What's the matter? I had a vision. But it can't be connected. All things are connected, girl. Hasn't your mentor taught you that much? Stop calling me, girl. My name is Willa. The puka jumped up on top of the boulder. What is it you know? Tell me. An alien race from one of the Orion systems is planning to attack Earth. Rusalka was horrified. What did I tell you? Disaster. You're saying the existence of a few wraiths altered our future? Yes. No. They altered our present. This present will lead to that future. How do you know this wasn't always going to happen? Willa said. I haven't time to explain now. He turned and leapt back toward the woods. Wait. Willa cried out. Where are you going? To tell the other elementals, of course. But, isn't there something we can do to change our path, to stop the attack? Willa said, desperate to stop her horrifying vision. I don't know. I need to consult with my queen. She may have an answer. And with that, Rusalka disappeared into the shadows. Willa sat on the boulder, her mind sorting through everything the temperamental puka had said. She felt a chill despite the warm breeze that ruffled her hair. Willa headed home, a million questions buzzing in her head. Kale ran his finger along the star chart projected on the tabletop within the League's council chamber. Kara, Val, Atten, Dennick, Alara and Brim were present along with Gar and 2 other council members about Dennick's age. One was a chestnut-hued woman named Jana, her angled face framed by black hair in an ancient style that would have reminded a human of Cleopatra, and the other was a lean, wolfish man with a shaved head known simply as Koro. "This is the route we took from Earth," Kale explained as a glowing line appeared in the wake of his finger. "We encountered the phenomenon you mentioned right about here." He planted his finger at the outer edge of the Zo's solar system. A red dot marked the spot. "It's a wonder any of you survived," Koro said. "The maelstrom is dozens of light-years across, the only passage in the skin of a kind of energy bubble that encloses the Empire and prevents it from spreading. Charting its borders, looking for another way out, cost our people 21 ships over time. We'll have to go through the maelstrom if we're to get you safely back to Earth," Dennick said. "The bubble is impenetrable everywhere else." Kale nodded. "Your son helped me with some calculations. Far as I can figure, a year on Zos is pretty much the same as on Earth, so your light-year measurements are a match to mine." "But this bubble? It's always existed?" "We're not sure," said Koro. "We only became aware of it about 300 years ago." "It can't have always been there," Brim added tentatively. Alara turned to her son. "Why do you say that?" "Well, I've been studying the different worlds in the Empire. The overlords didn't originate on any of them, so, if they came from somewhere else, the bubble couldn't have existed 1,000 years ago when they arrived." Dennick nodded and fixed Brim with a smile of pride. Kale looked around the table. "And none of you know what this bubble is? Why it formed?" They all shook their heads. "We're just grateful it kept the Empire from enslaving more worlds," Kara added. Gar fixed his eye on Kale. "Of course, now that you're here, the Empire can make it safely through the maelstrom." Kara's calm, commanding voice drew all eyes to her. "We need to refit our ships with the same technology." "We're working with the specs he gave us," Gar interjected, "but we seem to be missing some information." Kale nodded. "The navigational interface." "The what?" Gar said with a puzzled frown. "It's the only thing I was able to withhold from the Archon's interrogators," Kale said. "I'm hoping that, without that piece of information, his scientists won't be able to duplicate all our technology." "They also interrogated your crew," Dennick pointed out. "One of my jailers bragged that my pilot, Elowin, was dead." Kale said, sadly. "Only our pilots really know how the interface works." "What's a navigational interface?" Gar pressed. "Our pilots communicate with the ship mind to mind." "I don't understand," Kara said. "How's that possible?" Kale smiled. "Our ships are sentient." Willa climbed back up the oak branches outside her window and slipped into her room. A luminaria flared to life, painting Lily's face with golden light. "Good evening, Puka." She sat in a chair near Willa's hammock and waited patiently for Willa to explain herself. Disoriented by her mother's unexpected presence, Willa glanced behind her, fearing Lily was referring to Rusalka, then realized Lily was only addressing her by her nickname. Willa's mind raced, weighing her options, searching for a plausible story. She quickly settled on saying she'd met Thorn in the woods, but Lily spoke first. "Before you say a word, I think there's something you should know," Lily said, her tone even but serious. "Please sit down." Willa sat on the edge of her hammock. She'd never seen her mother this somber before and was slightly unnerved by it. Lily held her daughter's uncertain gaze. "We received word about an hour ago that Rowan and Thorn stole a ship from Andromeda Spaceport and were last seen charting a course for the Orion Nebula." Willa's head swam in a dizzying whirlpool of emotions that left her reeling. She stared at her mother, hoping this was a bad dream, wishing herself to wake up. "Your father's gone after them, but once they engage the Q-jump, there will be no way to track them," Lily said. knowing she was tearing Willa's heart out with every unwelcome word. Willa finally found her tongue. But I told them their father was safe. It's a hard thing to trust the safety of a loved one to strangers. I should have seen this in the Shards. Perhaps you were preoccupied, Lily said in a tone that hinted she already knew the truth. Holly spoke to you. She did indeed. You've been keeping strange company for a girl your age. What does the Nocturnal want with you? I promised not to tell. That may work with Holly, but I'm your mother. A promise is a promise. You taught me that. A promise made to a shadow is just as empty. Out with it. Willa crossed her arms. A sickness grew in her stomach as she glared at her mother in defiance for the first time in her young life. I see I also taught you my stubborn streak, Lily said. She rose from the chair. It retracted into the nano-glass floor. Very well. I suggest you devote your full attention to kenning Thorne's and Rowan's whereabouts in the Shards tomorrow, before it's too late. Lily turned and descended down the spiral stairs. Willa flopped back onto her hammock, heartsick. Exhausted as she was, she knew she'd get no sleep tonight. The harrowing memory of her broken body under the Archon's titanium boot mixed with fearful visions of Thorne and Rowan being tortured like their father. Willa had never felt so helpless. Her mind was lost in a dark maze of dire possibilities. The only thought that gave her a sliver of hope was that the next Divinorum vision might reveal a clear path to the light. Let me get this straight, Gar said, his knuckles resting on the council tabletop. Your ships can think? Kale nodded. Not only that, the ship's navigational controls tap directly into the pilot's mind. Without that neural bond, it's impossible for anyone to fly our ships. The council members exchanged glances. This was good news. The Archon's technicians will dissect your ship. They're bound to figure that out sooner or later, Kara said, bringing the mood down a notch. Possibly, Kale said, but without my pilot's help, it will take a while. Dennick looked at Gar, sharing the same thought. How long to retrofit our ships with the tech you're able to duplicate? A month, maybe sooner. Gar frowned. Month? Brim jumped in, eager to share what he'd learned from Kale about Earth. The time it takes for Earth's moon to make one orbit. About 1/5 of the time it takes this moon to orbit the rogue planet. Gar nodded his understanding. Good. Let's get started. Kale looked to Dennick. I thought you'd take me back to Earth first. Gar wasn't pleased. The Archon has a legion of techs. They'll adapt their ships faster than we can. Kale thought it through. I can probably outfit one small ship in a few days, go to Earth and be back within a week. He noticed everyone's confusion. 1/4 of a month, he added. Gar shook his head, unconvinced. This is the first real advantage we've had in a long time. We can't afford to wait. I have an idea, Brim said, somewhat nervous. Alara turned to her son. Go ahead, this is no time to be shy. Well, if we take Master Ashgrove back to Earth first, maybe his people would join our cause. We could return with a fleet of advanced ships. Nobody spoke for several moments. Brim began to wonder if they thought his idea was stupid, or perhaps even insane. Dennick's laugh broke the tension. He slapped Brim on the back, beaming with pride. It takes new eyes to see a new path. Out of the mouths of babes, Kale said. I'm 16, Brim said, bristling a bit. It's just an expression. It means what your father said. But my people are peaceful. Sharing our tech is one thing. I'm not sure you can expect them to fight in your war. It'll be your war too once the Archon adds your technology to his fleet, Jana said. Kale gave her slight nod, reluctant to admit the truth of her statement. Kara turned to Gar. We'll go with Brim's plan. Pick the fastest ship and begin the retrofit. That would be, the spear, Gar said, his one good eye fixed on Koro. My ship? But what if it's needed for a stealth mission? I can't think of a more important stealth mission than this, Kara said, settling the matter. Koro bowed his head. As you wish, Counselor. Gar, since you'll be working with Captain Ashgrove, I suggest you accompany him to Earth to learn all you can about their tech, Kara said. Gar nodded. It would be my honor. May I join them, Counselor? Brim said, a bit too eagerly. Dennick squeezed his son's shoulder. You've already proven your worth, son. You don't need to volunteer for every mission. Alara rested her hand on Brim's other shoulder. Earth is very far away. If anything should go wrong. You and Father take greater risks every day, Brim said. You promised I could join you as long as we don't go to Zoe's or a security outpost. Besides, I want to meet Rowan and Thorn, Master Ashgrove's sons. Maybe I can help convince them and others to join us. A silent conversation passed between Dennick and Alara through the special bond shared by couples that are deeply connected. He's no longer a boy, Dennick said. Alara knew it was true, though her heart wished it wasn't. She reluctantly nodded and fixed her moist eyes on Dennick. I'll see to it he returns safely, Dennick promised. As will I, Kale said. I'll keep an eye on him, said Gar. I can take care of myself, Brim said, but smiled at Gar's joke. Dennick smiled. No one doubts that, my son. It takes a village to raise a child, said Kale. I'm not a child, Brim said, sour-faced. It's just an old Earth expression. Alara matched Kale's smile. The more I learn of Earth, the more I like it. Gar's fingers tapped impatiently on the table. Then let's not waste any more time getting there. Chapter 10. Rite of Passage. People are often in a rush to complete processes, finish projects, accomplish goals and arrive at destinations, thinking all the while these things are their purpose in life. We've all heard it said that the journey is the destination, that the process is the entire point of life, but what's truly important to understand is that, if one isn't focused in the present, vital information can be overlooked that will help you move forward. Life is like a series of stepping stones. If your foot isn't firmly planted on each stone as you walk, you may slip and fall off your path as you attempt to rush to the next one. Excerpt from A Cryptic's Guide to Life by Holly Cotton. Willa knocked on the intricate carvings that covered the door to Poppy's cottage. The two-story wood and stone structure sat on the outskirts of Port Dublin, overlooking the Grand Canal that led inland from the sea. The door opened, framing the slender figure of Sylvania Rousseau, Poppy's mother. She was draped in a blood-red Japanese-style robe tied with a black satin sash that matched the soft moccasins on her feet. Sylvania glanced down at Willa with deep brown eyes that still carried a trace of humanity, though a few black flecks revealed her deeper transformation into a nocturnal. Sylvania's sculptured face was the same smooth shade of mocha as her daughter's, framed by long dark tresses that hung to her waist. She smiled at Willa, but it was distant and doll-like, more an expected formality to make others feel at ease rather than something truly felt by Sylvania. Good morning, Willa. Good morning, Diane Rousseau. Come in. I'll let Poppy know you're here, Sylvania said as she stood to one side. Willa entered, grateful that Poppy's mother wasn't prone to ask curious questions or engage in long conversations like her own mother and Holly. Willa stood in the cottage's small, oak-paneled living room as Sylvania climbed the wooden staircase that led to Poppy's room. Compared to the nest with its nano-glass technology, the cottage was practically archaic, like something out of a museum. Candles and oil lamps lent a warm glow to the room and leaded glass filled the window frames. The only concession to modern technology was a single luminaria globe used for communication that sat in the center of a round, polished burl wood table like a crystal ball in a 19th-century fortune-teller's parlor. Poppy bounded down the stairs, all smiles. Hey, Willa. Can we go somewhere and talk? Well, aren't we in a mood this morning? You're starting to mirror my mom. Sorry. Willa lowered her voice to a whisper. There's something I can't share with my mother or Holly, but I have to tell someone or I'll explode. Ooh, I love secrets, Poppy said, suddenly giddy with delight. Come on. She grabbed Willa's arm and yanked her out the front door. I know the perfect place. Are you sure you know how to operate a Q-jump engine? Rowan glared at Thorne. I told you, we learned how to pilot ships in first contact training. We won't be able to rescue Father if we wind up inside a planet or a star, Thorne said, trying not to sound as nervous as he was. Don't worry, I know what I'm doing. A beep on the control console drew their attention. What did you do? Thorne said, his panic rising. Nothing. Snapped Rowan. It's just the comm signal. Someone's hailing us. Don't answer it. We have to. It might be a patrol sentry. They'll know we stole the ship. Thorne said, his voice rising even higher. They won't, Rowan said. This is the ship I train on. It's keyed to my frequency. He rested his palm on the console and spoke to the ship's computer. Corvus, answer the hail. Answering, the ship's voice droned. A section of the nano-glass wall above the control console transformed into a view screen and River's face appeared. Father Hillycrissing, Rowan said calmly, as though the encounter was expected. How may I be of service? I applaud your gallantry, boys, but a rescue attempt would be foolhardy without more information and a lot more help. This is just a training run, Rowan said. I'm showing my brother the ropes. I spoke with your mentor, Rowan. Your normal flight plan doesn't match your present trajectory. Come back with me and we'll talk this through. Thorne jumped in before Rowan could respond. There's too much talk and not enough action. River remained placid. What makes you think you can find your father? Rowan took over before Thorne could interrupt again. There's a new Q space theory I learned in class. Quantum jump engines create a unique signature at the departure and arrival points in space. We know the general coordinates of our father's last known position. We'll scan for his ship's signature and run a new trifractal algorithm to determine the most probable points his ship jumped to from there. River was impressed. I probably shouldn't tell you this, but your mentor did mention you were top in your class. Rowan smiled and winked at Thorne. However, River said, rescuing Kale on your own is still unwise, especially considering Willa's vision of what the Orions did to him. We won't be alone if you join us, Rowan said hopefully. If you're so sure you can track your father's course, then let's go back and present your plan to the Quorum and the Contact Council. If they approve, we'll have a rescue squad with us. And if they don't approve? I'm sorry, Father Hillycrissing. We can't take that chance. River tapped a control. Rowan and Thorne steadied themselves as their ship shuddered. What was that? Thorne said, his panic returning. I've locked you in a tractor beam, River said. We're returning to Earth and that's that, understood? Power down your engine and force field and stand by. Rowan nodded his assent as his hand drifted toward the neural interface on his console. Shut down all secondary systems, he said to the ship. Secondary system shutting down. Wait. River said. Maintain comm. The screen vanished before River could finish. Rowan kept his hand on the neural interface. Emergency power to engine and shields. Match shield frequency to the tractor beam. Initiating, the ship responded. River watched on his view screen as Rowan's force field expanded to a large sphere and synchronized with his tractor beam. He tried to compensate but he could only lock onto the force field instead of the ship's hull. Rowan's engine flared to life. His ship popped into Q-space and vanished as the force field collapsed. River shut down his tractor beam's futile attempt to lock onto empty space. River stared at the stars on his screen, wondering how he would tell Lily and the quorum that Rowan and Thorn had given him the slip. Top of his class indeed, he muttered to himself as he pondered his next move. Willa and Poppy sat on the grey stones of the ruins of a 12th-century castle at the Rock of Cashel, perched on a hilltop overlooking the verdant Irish countryside. They were hundreds of miles from Port Dublin, having used the Shattuck to transport to the remote location. "I come here to ponder sometimes," Poppy said as she gazed at the jumbled stones around the foundations of the roofless castle chapel. "Seems like a place of secrets, so I thought yours might be at home here." Willa smiled at the thought that there might be a place where all secrets were safe from prying eyes and ears. "It's beautiful," she admitted, her spirits lifted. "So what's peeling you?" Poppy said, unable to contain her curiosity a moment longer. Words flooded from Willa's mouth fast as a bursting dam. "I had a tattered vision in the Divinorum ritual because I have the genetic markers of an ancient alien bloodline that showed me Earth's in danger of attack from a malevolent alien race. Thorn and Rowan stole a ship to look for their father who was captured and tortured by those aliens, and because I told them he'd been rescued by some resistance group, they're probably headed for danger too." One of the nocturnals in the quorum, Belladonna Bloodroot's great-granddaughter, made me promise to use my boosted abilities to search for a formula Belladonna created that can supposedly turn someone into a wraith but actually turned Belladonna into a banshee because of a manky little puka who tricked her by giving her the wrong ingredients, and he insists that if I find the real formula, it could basically plunge Earth into chaos or destroy the fabric of spacetime or something equally horrible. Poppy stared at Willa for a heartbeat or two and then burst out laughing. "Wow. When you said you had a secret, I thought you meant you and Thorn were, you know, riding the unicorn or something. I know you got the glad eye for him." Poppy. "This isn't a joke," Willa said, blushing from the risque innuendo. "On top of all that, my vision showed Thorn dying from a stab wound and the aliens burning Port Dublin to ashes." Poppy saw the pain in Willa's eyes and realized she wasn't kidding. "I'm sorry, Willa, I didn't mean to make light of." "But are you sure the visions weren't just a spin from the Divinorum? The first time Mom went through the ritual, she had all sorts of crazy blinks that never came true." "Like what?" "Well, I don't recollect them all, but there was one that stuck with me because it was so gammy. She said she saw this girl with gray skin like a whelk, but with pale eyes, and she swore that the girl could see her, even though she was just part of Mom's blink. She said the girl spoke to her, though Mom wouldn't tell me what she said." Poppy stopped as she saw the blood drain from Willa's face. "Willa? What's wrong?" "I need to talk to your mother." "Why?" "Because I saw that girl in my vision, too. She looked right at me and said, 'Who are you?' I think she's one of the aliens who want to attack Earth. Maybe she has some sort of telepathic ability and could sense me through the vision." Poppy frowned in confusion. "But Mom blinked that years ago." "Like you said, Divinorum does gammy things with time," Willa said, recalling the images of the past, present and future versions of herself she witnessed in the Shards. "The nocturnal you made that promise to. It's Selene Nymphea, isn't it?" Poppy said. Willa was startled. "Are you telepathic as well as psychic now?" "No. Mom said she's always been a pain in the ass. I just figured it had to be her." "Hey, wait a tick," Poppy said, suddenly nervous. "If that girl in your vision is real, does that mean Mom's other blinks might come true after all?" "Let's shad home and find out." Willa and Poppy hopped off the stone blocks and ran back toward the Shattuck like the devil was on their heels. A crystalline sphere full of stars, beautiful and serene, floated in a silent, black void. A crack appeared and ran down the center of its pristine surface, splitting the sphere in two. The glistening orb shattered and exploded into hundreds of shards, dozens of which turned into cold, black stones as they tumbled through the void. The distant Earth grew larger as the rocky shards sped toward it and turned into fiery missiles as they burned their way through the atmosphere and slammed into the ground, vaporizing entire cities in a series of blinding flashes that spread across the globe. Tears streamed down Willa's cheeks as Sylvania pulled her hand back from Willa's third eye and broke the link that allowed her to share her devastating vision. Willa and Poppy knelt on the floor in Poppy's living room in front of Sylvania's chair. Poppy placed a hand on Willa's shoulder. "Are you okay?" Willa could only manage a nod as she wiped away her tears. She looked at Sylvania's placid expression, amazed at how she could remain so calm in the face of such horror. "What does it mean?" Willa finally managed to say. Sylvania fell into a reverie. Willa waited and waited. She felt as if she was suffocating in the heavy silence. "I believe the crystal sphere of stars represents the interstellar alliance," Sylvania finally said. "And that something will create a rift among the member worlds that will lead to its destruction, along with Earth's. If my vision of an invasion comes true, wouldn't the alliance bond against a common enemy? Become stronger?" Willa said hopefully. Sylvania gave the slightest of shrugs. "We don't know the details." Willa was dumbfounded. "But the alliance has been around for hundreds of years. The only constant in the universe is change. Nothing lasts forever, Willa." Willa felt as though she was falling down a bottomless well. Her mind grasped for anything that would stop her descent into hopelessness. "The girl." Sylvania cocked her head at Willa's outburst. "Girl? The gray girl in your vision. What did she say to you?" Sylvania fell into a reverie and Willa felt herself suffocating in the heavy silence that followed. "See what I live with?" Poppy whispered in Willa's ear. Sylvania blinked back to reality. She focused on Willa's worried face, but remained silent. Diane Rousseau. What did the girl say? A single tear flowed down Sylvania's cheek. Poppy was stunned. For her mother, this was tantamount to an emotional outburst. "Mother? Are you okay?" Sylvania seemed not to hear her daughter. Her gaze remained fixed on Willa. The girl looked at me with her pale, ghostly eyes. She said, "You will replace the mother who betrayed me. I will make you queen of the witches." "Witches?" Willa blinked, confused. "I think it's her word for nocturnals or sages," Sylvania said. She stood and, without another word, walked up the stairs to her room and shut the door. Willa and Poppy stared in shock at each other, their hearts pounding. A vision of the gray girl forced its way into Willa's mind. Her hand held a weapon, pointed at the back of Poppy's head. It fired and the flash broke Willa's trance. Willa stood, shaken, her words barely a whisper. "Holly expects me at the Quorum Lodge." She headed for the door. Poppy merely nodded, at a loss to understand what just happened. "Willa?" Willa stopped. She knew full well what Poppy was going to ask and dreaded the answer she had to give. Willa's heart sank as she turned to face her friend's unsettled gaze. "I promise I'll do whatever I can to stop her," Willa said. "Stop her from what?" "The girl means to kill you and take your place as Sylvania's daughter." Rusalka stood before a gathering of several dozen pukas deep in the yew forest. Being shapeshifters, many looked like hares, but several appeared as goats or cats. A couple of pukas were disguised as black horses and there was even a diminutive, chalk-white woman with an elfin face and long black hair, but all of them were united by the soft glow of their crimson eyes. Aisling, their ancient queen, in the form of a large hare, was perched on a flat-topped boulder in the center of the throng. She was covered with soft, snow-white fur and stared down at Rusalka with shocking pink eyes, the sole exception to her red-eyed subjects. You're certain the timeline has shifted? Aisling said in a voice that warbled like a babbling brook. Grennan, an elder puka, his fur mottled gray and brown with a single white patch above his left eye, stepped forward and stood next to Rusalka. "Aye, my queen. I've kenned upline and downline afore and aft the now. The shift and the danger are real, sure enough." "The seer has seen," Aisling said, following tradition. "The seer has seen," the rest of the pukas chimed in response. "What are we to do then, Aisling?" Rusalka said. "This matter concerns not just our clan but all elementals," the queen pronounced. "Send out word. We must call an enclave." Willa stood in the Celtic circle in the Quorum Lodge, heavy with worry about Thorn, Rowan and Poppy as well as Sylvania's disturbing visions. Holly, Argus and Alder formed the points of an equilateral triangle just outside the circle. Alder was dressed more simply than usual, in a buff tunic with matching pants tucked into soft, caramel-colored knee-high boots. Argus handed the cup of divinorum to Willa. "Good batch." Willa wrinkled her nose at the smell. "Oh, yes, much better than last time." Argus gave her a look but said nothing. "Shouldn't I be sitting?" Willa said, worried her legs would give out at any moment. "Not for the Triskelion," said Alder. "You need to be nimble for this task. When do I look for the ship Thorn and Rowan took?" "You'll know the right moment," Holly said and gestured for Willa to drink. Willa sighed, took a sip and handed it back to Argus, who placed it on the fireplace mantel. Willa felt a warm wave wash over her. She closed her eyes and felt like she was falling, but couldn't do anything to stop the sensation. Her eyes snapped open and Willa found herself already floating inside the titanic liquid crystal sphere. The liquid froze and shattered as before, but this time, 3 large, multifaceted shards, in the same positions as her mentors, rotated around her, kicking off brilliant reflections that made Willa squint. She caught fleeting glimpses of Holly, Argus and Alder in a few of the facets as the shards tumbled toward her. The 3 jagged shards started to rotate as they approached, picking up speed until they spun so fast, Willa could barely make out individual facets. Smaller shards shattered in their path, spraying Willa with crystal shrapnel that sliced her skin in a dozen places. In a panic, Willa tried to float above the spinning crystalline blades, but floundered helplessly as though she was suspended in a bubble of zero gravity. The 3 shards closed in on her, threatening to grind her to pieces. Willa's mind raced, searching for any means of escape. The lethal shards were now so close that Willa could see her terrified reflection flickering in their glistening facets. In desperation, Willa extended her arms and twisted her weightless body into a spin. She willed herself to spin faster and faster, like a skater on ice, until she matched the shard's rotation. A gleaming shard grew around Willa, encasing her in a crystalline cocoon that locked into the other 3 shards. All 4 spun smoothly, like synchronized gears. Willa peered into the facets of the 3 shards as they rotated in a circle around her. Images of Rowan's escape from her father played out before her eyes, along with a path of glowing lines that traced their route to the Orion Nebula. And straight into the swirling maw of the maelstrom. Willa watched, horrified, as Rowan's ship followed a dozen probable paths through the deadly gravitational whirlpool, each ending in the utter destruction of the tiny craft. Except for one trajectory that allowed the ship to survive. All the images ended in a blinding flash and Willa was once again standing in the lodge, her 3 mentors steadying her with outstretched hands. "Well done, Willa," Holly said, beaming. "Yes, well done indeed," Alder agreed, "but it will be all for nothing if we can't warn those boys of the danger." "My father's still out there," Willa said. "I need to transmit the path I saw to him. Maybe he can catch up to Thorn and Rowan before it's too late." Argus grunted agreement, removed his large hand from Willa's back and went over to the far wall. The Sasquatch touched a wall panel. It slid open to reveal a communication console. Willa went to it and input the coordinates that still floated in her mind's eye. River's ship floated among the stars while he spoke to Brahma Kamal, head of the Contact Council, on his view screen. Brahma was a Himalayan hybrid, named after the legendary White Lotus. His large, crystal blue eyes were placid as a mountain lake and his smooth skin was golden and warm as honey. He wore a snow-white, high-collared tunic emblazoned with the 5-star insignia of the Interstellar Alliance, and his bald head, a feature common among many hybrids, made him look like an ancient Tibetan monk. He spoke with a slight East Indian accent. "We believe Rowan is correct regarding the trifractal algorithm," Brahma said. "We've uploaded it to your computer and you should be able to use it to track his ship, as well as Kale's." "You're giving me permission to follow them?" River said, surprised. Brahma nodded. 5 more ships will join you within the hour. You understand the dangers, of course? I've seen Willa's data on the anomaly. We'll be careful. Bring them all back safely, Master Hillikrising. I'll do my best, Master Kamal. Tuasha Tiani Pan. River was a bit rusty in the ancient tongue spoken by hybrids before the landing, but, being a first contact specialist, as well as a traditionalist, Brahma spoke it fluently, along with 12 other human and alien languages. The phrase, loosely translated, meant, "May the stars guide you home," and River searched his memory for the proper response. "Ha Matra Tuolo Shatiani," he finally managed to say. "Their light is the beacon that lights my path." River tapped his screen off and began the trifractal calculations while he waited for his escorts to arrive. His comm panel beeped. River tapped the screen back on and faced Lily. "Hello, my love," he said as calmly as he could. "What did Brahma say?" she asked with uncharacteristic impatience. "I'm going after them with a rescue squad." Lily remained silent for several moments, but every emotion that flickered across her face shouted loud and clear. "River. I'm just retrieving the boys," he assured her. "The squad will continue to search for Kale." Lily's concern was only slightly diminished. "Promise you'll come back to me." "I promise," River said, forcing his eyes to stay on hers. Rivers always flow to the sea. They were both wise enough to know there were unforeseen dangers that could render their promises empty, but the pledge gave them hope. "Give Willa a hug and a kiss from me. Tell her I'll bring Thorn home." Lily nodded as she wiped away a tear. She cut the connection. River stared at the blank nano-glass wall for several heartbeats, then continued to enter the calculations into the navigational computer. He placed his hand on the console's neural circuit. "Rigel," he said to the ship, "what are the odds of success on this mission?" Rigel's smooth voice filled the cabin. "My psychology subroutine suggests it wouldn't be wise to answer that question." River nodded with a sigh of resignation. "That's what I thought." Willa sat on a low, flat boulder deep in the yew forest, eyes closed, as the dappled light of late afternoon danced across her face. Her breathing was slow and regular, her other senses alert. Holly stood nearby, her attention focused on Willa, still as one of the trees save for her long, silver locks that swayed in a gentle breeze. Willa opened her eyes. "I still don't hear anything." Holly sighed. "Don't listen with your ears, listen with your heart." "I don't even know what that means," Willa said, mildly frustrated. "I can already do things way beyond the level of Cryptic. Why is this important?" Holly drew Willa's attention to a large fallen tree lying on the ground, its gnarled, twisted roots exposed. "The power at each level above Cryptic is like facing stronger and stronger wind. If you're not sufficiently grounded, with deep roots in this reality, the forces you'll be dealing with can uproot you and kill you like that tree." Willa pondered the rotting, moss-encrusted tree trunk, settled herself and closed her eyes again. Holly came closer and spoke in a soft, soothing tone. Reach out to the trees. Imagine them reaching out to you. Don't listen for a voice. Rather, search for a feeling. Willa focused her imagination, continued her rhythmic breathing. I think I'm beginning to feel something, she said. Good, Holly said. What are you feeling? Willa opened her eyes. Stupid. She got to her feet and deliberately ignored Holly's disappointed expression. I'm sorry. I just can't wrap my mind around this. You saw the shards. Think of the trees as reflections of you in the shards. You want me to see myself as a tree? You are a tree. You're the trees, the animals, the flowers, the rocks and the bees. You're everything and everything is you. It's all one, Holly said. Willa tried to see it in her mind. So, talking to a tree is like talking to myself. Yes, Holly nodded, her hope rising. But then, how do I know I'm not just talking to myself? Isn't that what crazy people do? Willa said. Only fools talk sense all the time, Holly replied in cryptic fashion. You can't understand the universe by always trying to make sense out of it. It's too big to be contained in our minds. Sometimes, the only sensible thing to do is to go out of your mind. No offense, Willa said with smile, but I think you've mastered that part. Despite her frustration, Holly laughed. You're right about that. Trying to teach someone as stubborn as you is crazy. Holly sat on the boulder next to Willa. I think you need a different teacher. Holly, I didn't mean. Holly pulled a small vial of divinorum from a pocket in her tunic. Here? Now? Shouldn't we do this in the lodge? Willa said, slightly nervous. I always carry a vial for emergencies, said Holly. Is that what this is? An emergency? You're the one who said we don't have much time, Holly reminded her. It's risky, but you need a boost. This is a special draft, brewed by Argus to deliver one specific lesson. Risky? Willa said as Holly handed her the vial. You'll either have a breakthrough, or a breakdown, but I have faith in you. Was that a compliment? I can't be sure, coming from you, Willa said with a mischievous smile. Holly threw her a wry look. You can't move forward by having me pat you on the back, dear girl. Willa's smile faded. There's my mentor. She downed the divinorum in a single gulp. Her face scrunched like she'd bitten the sourest lemon in existence and then softened as she fell into a trance. As the divinorum vision took hold, Willa's mind floated in a black void that contained only one thing, an extremely tiny point of light that hung weightless like a self-illuminated dust mote. The mote shot away at the speed of light, then returned and passed by again, shooting off in the opposite direction. It reappeared from above and whipped by as it continued downward. The third time, the particle appeared from the right and disappeared to the left, forming an imaginary XYZ axis of 3 dimensions.